Yes.
Last summer, thanks for the talk, that was great. Last summer I watched a movie in Japan called Godzilla vs. Ghidorah.
Yes, exactly.
And
yes.
it was set at a G summit,
yes.
G8 summit.
Yep.
And that seemed to have an exceptional amount of cheese.
Yes, very self-consciously so.
So it seems like there's a washback effect.
Yes.
So they're embracing
exactly.
the cheese.
Exactly. And I think, if we actually look back to the 1960s, they were conscious that these were cheesy as well. And they weren't just making that for American consumption, but it very was much about Japanese. People viewed them periodically in Japan as well. But some of the most recent films, and Ghidorah at the G8 Summit, and that same director whose name is escaping me right now, made a quite wonderful film called The World Sinks Except Japan, which is a parody of Japan Sinks, and which is very much that same model, which also sort of shows his fascination with Kim Jong-il in interesting ways. But I think, actually the whole giant monster genre has gone an amazing number of directions since the Godzilla series came out. We see it in this country. We see Cloverfield, which is a pretty imaginative film, frankly. But then, you can just go into, almost any media source in America and find fun being poked at, sort of Godzilla movies. So it's become this sort of free-floating global signifier. But cheese is definitely part of that flavor. Yes.
Maybe off topic, but have you looked at any general trends in relative profitability of these sorts of films in Japan and the US?
It's very hard to get data on that kind of material. First of all, because Japanese studios are very secretive about any kind of costs of the films and then the gross of the films. And I've tried for a long time to get this kind of information and have failed miserably working with Japanese scholars as well. And frankly, the American side is very difficult as well because most of the distributors who are putting these out were pretty much fly-by-night operations. There are little things based in the San Fernando Valley, that would be taking in Italian and Japanese films, churning them out. They weren't publicly traded. They didn't report. So even if you go through Variety, the Hollywood Reports like that, you're not getting a lot of good information, trustworthy information about the box office. The reality is that the first movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, did do pretty well in the American box office, and that's what sort of set the genre. And that one we do have fairly decent figures for in both the American and Japanese cases. Though over time, clearly the attendance in Japan went down quite steadily, till by the time of the 1970s, they were very small audiences watching these films. That's reflected in how much they invested in them as well. In more recent years, you can track pretty closely, the audiences have been steady in Japan and have largely been a mixture of kids and nostalgic people of my age. And it's not a growing audience at this point, even though it's still a bankable property. Yes?
If there was, there's the whole effort to translate these films and to cheesify them.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm curious, was there also a movement, or were there underground or kind of cult classics that actually during the same time period, in the 50s and 60s, wanted to watch the films in the original language, that were really wanted to keep that spirit there, or was that more of a recent thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've tried to find that kind of sort of subterranean authenticity fan base for the. I don't think it was there in the 60s and 70s. I think it's a later thing. And I think really a lot of that comes out of nostalgia. That these are people who grew up watching the cheesy movies and then became curious later on, man, I wonder what the original was actually like. And so, from when I started becoming an active fan, and I feel like this is going to become an AA meeting, pretty quickly here. When I first, came out of the closet as a Godzilla fan, you could go and find fan subs and so forth. Yes.
Could you elaborate on the comment that you made that Japan may have missed the window of the soft power? Like, what's your take in the last 2 decades of this influx, or constantly increasing influx of anime and manga and video games that are coming into the States?
Yeah. I wonder if we are caught in a period, and I don't know if we're going to move out of it or not, where there is this split image of Japan. for the American public. And one part of it is this very positive view of quality products, sophisticated products coming out of Japan. And the other now, on this other side, I'll put Toyota on that other side as well, of sort of things that had great promise but fell apart. And this might be a sort of more sort of intellectual view, but that view of Japan as being sort of yesterday's news and something we can make fun of again, I think is definitely out there at the same time. And this paper I was trying to explain, because I really have tried to understand where this idea of the kooky Japanese came from, because it's now so embedded in society. What's that? There's like, the Japanese game show knockoff and all this stuff that's on TV. And I think it is the rise of this sort of image has followed the decline of Japan's hard power. So to the extent one can say that getting attention at all might give one some soft power, maybe the Japanese do have some potential. But at this point, I'm not sure that it's entirely positive. Yeah, Faye?
Also kind of related to the same question about the audience or the American consumer. You talk about the bifurcation and kind of more highbrow, cool Japan versus more cheesy thing. Do you think that they're also kind of different catered, different kind of audience that they do not mix the audience, the consumers?
That's an interesting question, which I haven't really thought a lot about. But it'd be interesting to see. I mean, this could be like a focus group. I can tell if consuming high quality Japanese pop culture, say like anime, and consuming cheese like MXC, I have the sense it overlaps. Is my guess. I don't know. What do you think?
It does. I like both.
Okay. Come on now, tell me the truth.
The other thing is this kind of 50s and 60s kind of, do you use cheesification? Versus the recent kind of game shows, TV kind of, it seems like also kind of operate on a little bit different thing. Maybe they have similar kind of origin, but it seems like kind of parody spirit is very alive.
It does seem it is closer to the surface now than it was then. It's much more self-conscious, and that might go back to what Annalee Newitt says, that cheesiness really has gone from being sort of a minor theme in American pop culture to almost be a defining characteristic of some aspects of American pop culture experience today. That now we create things specifically with that purpose, whereas before it was just part of a larger picture. What you say though about sort of audiences and the nature of audiences, clearly this was part of in the 50s and 60s as well though, because the audiences they were going after with these cheesified products were clearly down market audiences. That they were the distributors described them as unsophisticated audiences, by which they meant, and they were specific about this, unsophisticated meant kids, people who lived in rural areas, and people who lived in the South. These were the main consumers of Godzilla movies that were cheesed up for double features. Yes?
I had a question about the sort of the mukokuseki, the boundaryless Japanese film. So whether you're talking about the high-end anime and things of this sort, which really were, I mean, I just really like to hear you talk a little bit more about that phenomenon where you have like Miyazaki films being dubbed by top, A-list American actors.
Exactly. Yeah.
Becoming sort of household products, and do you see that as the kind of peak of Japanese soft power that's now declining?
I think you could say that, although, I personally, this in my sort of the recent book that came out about globalization, I'm very skeptical about the whole mukokuseki thing, because I'm really not sure how much of the audience globally really doesn't recognize that these products are Japanese. I think now a lot of people don't know what Godzilla was. A lot of people come up to me and say, "Oh, Godzilla was Japanese? How interesting is that?" Because they just remember the Hollywood version. There are probably people who watch The Ring and things like that and say, "Well, that began in Japan. What do you know?" So I am dubious that this idea that, with the exception perhaps of something like Hello Kitty, that really is a free-floating signifier, I think, and that is something that can be dubbed by anyone and that can be seamless. That most things like anime or manga really are in fact mukokuseki. I think just like with the monster movies, which gained cheesiness by being Japanese, so even the high-quality Japanese pop culture exports today are identified as being Japanese and gain something extra from that. And I think in those top cases, that was the soft power potential.
Just a follow-up.
Yeah.
Someone told me recently, I don't know if it's true, that Miyazaki, the whole Studio Ghibli has fallen on hard economic times and that he's having to scale back quite a lot. And is that due to domestic, the lack of popularity of these films in Japan or worldwide?
I'm not sure exactly. Again, the finances of these things are very mysterious to everyone. But one does have a sense that animation's popularity in Japan has been on the decline in general, and that globally, Japanese animators have never been able to take advantage effectively of the financial potential of their craft. That they have never captured the returns that they might have. This is the case even in something, probably the most famous explosion, which was Pokemon, which the American distributor made all the money, and Nintendo actually got very little of the profits from all that. So the Japanese have not been very canny in the way they have marketed this, and not a lot of that has gone back to reinvigorate the industry. Although in manga, I think there's plenty of vigor right now, but that's a global vigor as well.
Maybe one last question. I'm always wondering how one measures this soft power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, impossible. And that's why I think soft power has fallen on hard times as a concept too, because none of us know. I mean, what I've asked in a number of talks, what I usually ask in my classes is, most of us Americans eat pizza 3 times a week. How does that make us feel towards Italy? I'm not sure that this has increased, the sort of image of Italy in our minds, or gives Italy some kind of sort of moral hold on our characters. I think soft power really does work very well in examining America's place in the world, because there is a kind of aura about America, that American dream, and that universal language that Hollywood has captured for so long has done something. I'm not sure that the Japanese soft power or the Japanese pop culture experts have really infiltrated the world consciousness for long enough for us to see any kind of impact. And I'm not sure the message that they give is consistent enough as Hollywood's is, because Hollywood does have that kind of sunny, sappy, the sun will come up tomorrow, and isn't capitalism and democracy great? Even as we watch, the Terminator destroy the world, there still is that sort of Hollywood sort of morality running through. I'm not sure the Japanese message is as clear or as perhaps as broadly appealing as the American.
Even Miyazaki, very popular anime, still the
Yeah.
message is kind of very
That is ambiguous. And that's one reason why it's popular, I think, amongst many of the audiences which it has worldwide, and yet it makes it hard to capture the sort of mass global audience.
Any other question? Maybe one last question from the audience? Oh, no, and then
This cheesification that you talk about is American made.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
happened in other countries with Japan?
It's a wonderful question. I want to learn more. Unfortunately, my linguistic abilities are limited, but you'll see that in Europe it was handled in very much the same way. That they were dubbed in for European markets as well, often very cheaply, often the same kind of outfits that did the American dubbing, and that the movies were just packaged to meet local cheesy taste as well. In Germany, Godzilla movies were often marketed under the name Frankenstein, just because it became a generic term for a monster. And so Godzilla versus King Kong became Frankenstein versus King Kong in Germany. And now, if you went to a German movie theater and expected to see, Boris Karloff fighting a monkey, you've been very disappointed. But this was one of those things. And the same thing, in Spain, they were given different names and so forth that fit with those local conditions. And they were all cheesed up, it seems, across the board.
Logan?
Your cheese stereotype kind of reminds me of the current stereotype of Japanese culture being kind of highly perverted.
Yeah, okay, the perverted is interesting.
Do you think that that's also kind of a stereotype that's been created by Western media to make us feel superior?
I'd like to hear more about it. I'd like someone who really knows about that to study a little bit more and tell me a little bit more about it, because I think that's a really good question. Obviously, we don't see that perversion end in the Godzilla films. That's not, it's a different kind of approach to the Japanese. But I think there probably is that parallel perversion thing going quite quite a long ways back. And that might have shown up a little bit in What's Up, Tiger Lily, just that little clip we saw as well. That's a really good point. That'd be a good project for somebody. Smart.
How did Gojira become Godzilla?
It's a good question because everyone thinks it was a very conscious process because Godzilla sounds so great because we got the God thing, and now we use Zilla suffix for everything. You know, as I say in my book, that the Zilla suffix is just ubiquitous. You know, Mozilla, Tornzilla, Bridezilla. In fact, I would ask you to run any word with Zilla, and you will get something. So Spoonzilla, Forkzilla, Clockzilla, Computerzilla, all there. Jesuszilla, several thousand hits. And in the sense of being ecumenical, Allahzilla gets about 1,000 hits too. When it comes to the name though, people have always felt this must have been some big decision made in a Hollywood studio that Godzilla would sound great. In fact, just the way they transliterated Japanese into English in the 1950s, the JI became a DZI. And so he's saying Godzilla to Godzilla, it goes Godzilla, just sort of naturally, and that RL thing, of course, is natural. So they just did it straight by the textbook, but it turned out perfect, and that stuck.
Any other question? If not, let's thank Professor Z for a very. Thank you so much.